Tonight, we're going to tackle an array of different stories than just Bigfoot or Dogman. We're going to check out 14 camping experiences of people coming face to face with evil, paranormal, and the unknown. Camping isn't as safe as you think it is, no matter where you are or who you're with. My buddies and I were camping in the woods of California. We were the only ones in the area, and we knew this because of the camping registry. We were quite literally the only ones in a 20-mile radius. Anyway, everything was great and normal, and our campsite was on the side of a lake. At night, we all shared an 8-man tent. It was cozy with 8 guys in a tent, but not horrible. Anyway, at about 3 a.m. the first night, we were all suddenly awoken by one member of our group standing up in the tent and frantically opening the tent door. He poked his head out and began super frantically and nervously saying, "There's someone in our camp." He kept repeating it and sounded absolutely terrified. Needless to say, we were horrified that someone might be in our camp. We knew that we were supposed to be alone. Everyone who had just been woken up was looking at each other with the most mortified looks on their faces. After about 15 seconds of saying that someone was in our camp, he laid back down like nothing had happened and slept. He was sleepwalking and there was no one in the camp at all. It was pretty hard to fall asleep after that. I went turkey hunting with my dad in Shawnee National Forest several years ago. I was about 10 at the time. Took one afternoon to hike and scout out hunting posts. Along the trail, we saw a few blood spatters and drips, but no big deal, it's nature. About a 4th mile up the trail, however, we come up to 3 dogs hanging from a tree, gutted, bled out, and skinned. Okay, now that was pretty weird and scary. We kept going a bit further as there was a bluff not too far up the way that was pretty cool to look at. Come to the bluff, find weird symbols burned into the ground and on the sides of the rock wall. Candle wax was absolutely everywhere, and more blood all over the ground. By that time, my dad, whom I've never seen scared in my life, looked at me and said, "Let's go now." And we took off at a pretty quick pace back to camp. The worst part is that we didn't leave the campsite, so that night I laid awake in the camper freaking out at every sound I heard. I still get goosebumps thinking about that event to this day. When I was about 18, me and some friends took a road trip about 7 hours or so down to a national forest near Tallahassee, Florida. We were going to do a little car camping, drink a few ice-cold naughty lights, 18-year-old stuff. As such, we didn't want to be bothered by any park rangers, so we drove way deep into the woods. Got there, set up camp, had said natty lights, and me and a guy decided to go do a little exploring. So we walked about 100 yards from my site back to the main road. Saw another path directly across from us and started walking. Immediately, we started seeing signs that someone had lived there for a while. Big bags of trash, stuff like that. Should have been a huge red flag to turn around. But 18, nothing could hurt us. So we get to this campsite of an older white guy living out of his van. Clotheslines strung up, coolers placed all around, and a big, gorgeous dog. I think might be a golden retriever. We try to back out, but he sees us and starts talking. He's friendly enough and asks us where we're from. Tells us about some cool spots to check out in the park, and we end up chatting for 10 minutes and going on our way. I kept thinking to myself how odd it was that he gave directions in steps, not yards or miles. Guy always seems to be off balance, not stumbling drunk, but like he was walking on a balance beam, swaying side to side. Oh, and he was super excited to talk about national parks and forests where we were from. Okay, camping part over. We went back to our tents, fast forward 2 months, Same buddy calls me late at night and tells me to turn on the TV news. I do so. I see an old dude with a van, and you see where this is headed, but I didn't. So I get pissed at my friends for waking me up, and they tell me no, watch it. And then I see the golden retriever, and it all clicks. What on earth? The man's name was Gary Michael Hilton, convicted of at least 4 murders. He kidnapped and murdered a girl on Blood Mountain, Georgia, an older couple in North Carolina, and a girl in the same campsite not long after we left. Yes, the very same place he had been talking to us about. Obviously, we call the cops, they put us in touch with the FBI, and we get flown down to take investigations to the campsite, point out every spot we saw anything, tell them exactly what he told us, and show them the places he described to us. I didn't find out till after the trial, but apparently they have found out what appeared to be partially destroyed human finger bones in an area near the site. Had to fly down again to testify. I was camping in the Florida Keys one winter. I managed to survive the large snakes and even larger alligators, as well as the scorpions, which would get in my shoes at night. But one experience I will never forget. My campsite was next to an old rock quarry, which had filled with water and made a good place for swimming and getting water from. There was also an old dump site close to this quarry with piles of stoves and fridges and other various junk. It had been there for a while, but nothing new had been added to it for a very long time. One day, a fellow shows up and tells me that they were going to clean up the dump and burn some of the junk, so I better move my tent. So, I gathered up all my belongings and moved a few hundred yards back into the woods. That day, they start burning the garbage, and I thought nothing about it until I climbed into my tent at night. As soon as it got dark and I was falling asleep, my tent became covered with hundreds of rats. I guess they had moved out of the dump because of the fire and were just wandering around looking for food. They were everywhere, climbing up my ropes and over the top of the tent. I shook as many off and started a fire and staying up all night hoping they wouldn't return. They seemed to be gone, so the next night I stayed up in the same place thinking they had moved on to another dump or something. But no. Again, as it got dark, they had all returned, bringing some of their friends, as it seemed there was more now than ever. I again shook them off the tent and got a fire going. When the morning came, I packed up my tent and headed for a new place from those rats. As I was walking down the highway, wondering if I should return to another camping spot where I had been previously, there on the highway, near that place, was a dead 11-foot alligator which had crawled out from the groves only a few feet from where I had been camping a few weeks previously. I decided my Florida camping adventure had gone on long enough and went back home. Not a camper or a ranger, but an archaeologist. A few years back, we were doing a massive survey in the middle of nowhere in the interior of BC. All the crew had gone home, and it was just my boss and myself left for a few days to follow up and confirm some coordinates and finish some mapping. We head out from a motel an hour or so into the bush, middle of nowhere along deactivated logging roads. Closest town is miles and miles away. We hike out to this one area we had found a site a few weeks previously. For some reason, the whole area just felt off. So we get down to business, and about 15 minutes after being hunched over mapping, there's this weird, deafening whomp sound. Like I could feel pressure in my ears. I immediately looked at my boss about 20 feet away, and he is white as a ghost staring back at me. Standing it, again it happens. Whomp. Ear pressure and chest pressure just like I just got squeezed. Chills all over my body, and every hair is standing on end. My boss just looks at me and says, "Let's get out of here." We grab all of our shit and speed hike back to the truck. We never discussed it after that. No clue what it was, but I have never been so freaked out in my life. 10 years later, and I still get the chills thinking about it. There have been a lot of theories and sounds, but nothing like it. The best I can describe, you know when a large bird or an eagle takes flight, that initial whoosh, whoomp sounds of wings pumping in the air? It was kinda like that, but you would feel it, and it was much louder. When I was young, from ages 5 to 11, my dad lived in an old log cabin about 15 miles west of Sheridan, Wyoming, in the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains. Every summer when I was visiting, we would go up into the mountains backpacking and fishing for 2 days every weekend. We would park the truck, hike into a remote area fishing for trout along the way, and make camp wherever we ended up. We encountered a number of strange and creepy things and got into some scary situations with wildlife. But the one that sticks with me the most was an ancient abandoned camp that we had run into. We were hiking down a very steep slope to get to an area of creek that had been dammed up by beavers, hoping to catch some big old trout. I had climbed out on a rock ledge and was looking for a way down when I saw the stock action of an old rusty rifle sticking out of a tree, where the tree had grown around the barrel years before, about 10 inches above the ground. Dad and I climbed down to check it out, and we found a small cave at the base of the rock formation, only about 12 inches deep, which would make a nice natural shelter, but a really terrible place to set up a long-term camp. Inside, we found a bunch of really old stuff. 3 heavy-gauge unopened cans of food, an old iron cast pot that had holes rusted all the way through it, a crusty old saddle and bridle set, and a very old, deteriorated, heavy wool blanket, rolled up and tied with a leather belt. When we unwrapped the blanket, we found several personal items, including a rusty cap and ball-black powder revolver, a leather satchel with lead pistol shot, a powder horn with no black powder in it, tarnished old cartridges, presumably for the rifle in the tree, a straight razor, and most unsettling was a shirt with holes in it, over half of it stained with dried blood. As we stood there thinking about what all this meant, it occurred to me how remote this place was at the time. It was July of 1985 at the time, and the fact that whoever owned this shirt had been very seriously injured at one point. Stuck on a steep slope in the middle of absolutely nowhere, I got serious chills running down my spine. The only thing that somewhat dated this fateful campsite was the pistol and the rifle, both of which were made sometime in the 1870s, according to my father. There's no way to ever know what happened to the man who owned all this stuff, but the fact that he or someone he knew was obviously shot twice with either a gun or arrows, and all his belongings were sitting right where he left them, possibly 100 years later. It was highly unlikely he left that area alive. Discovering what amounts to a 100-year-old crime scene in the very remote wilderness kinda gave me the creeps. But mostly, it just made me sad to know how hopeless and alone this guy must have felt when he died. Just a few weeks ago, we were on a road trip from BC to San Diego, and we came upon a campsite just outside of Crescent City, California. We drove through. One side of the campground was relatively empty. I noticed a few scattered tents, but nobody close to the location we ended up picking. We had tons of space. We wanted an early night, so I started a fire with my girlfriend, and she started cooking. We ate, had a few beers, and climbed up to our rooftop tent with our dog by 9 p.m. or so. I had a rough time sleeping and woke up a few times, but finally fell into a decent state of sleep. In the pitch dark, with all of our tent windows and canvases closed, I was awoken at 1 a.m. by someone whistling outside of our tent to the tune of "When the Saints Come Marching In." After a few minutes of this repetitive whistling, I nudged my girlfriend, who, awoken, was obviously freaked out as well. The whistling then turned to chanting things like, "When you sleep here, you disrespect me, and when you disrespect me, you disrespect the U.S. Marines." This person would then start spelling out the words like FLEE. Their verbiage and tone kept getting more aggressive, so we decided to make a move. I slowly unzipped the tent while our guard dog was snoring and got my head out of the tent. I took a few seconds to let my eyes adjust and figure out where this person was. I felt more confident once I could somewhat see and hear, so I climbed down and the girlfriend passed me the dog and she climbed down too. We flipped the tent up without securing it and we jumped into the truck, with the person was still whistling, to a motel in Crescent City. The next morning, we drove back to get the few belongings that weren't in the truck, and a family who had been camping a few sites over said it went on for another 2 to 3 hours, and it was the scariest thing their family had ever experienced. I had an experience about 1.5 years ago in Colorado. I was hiking up a steep ridgeline, and my friend suddenly grabbed me and put a finger over his mouth, signifying that I needed to shut up. I looked over to the left of the trail, and about 50 yards away, there was a large white wolf. We stood still for about 5 minutes while it walked away in the opposite direction. I don't know if it was worth mentioning, but we slept in the car the night before the trailhead, and I remember that we heard some odd sounds the night before. It was mainly sounds of moving near the car and growling. We slept in the car with the windows down, and I remember it kind of freaked me out a bit. Not really creepy, but it was a surreal incident that was spooky and unexpected for a normal hike. Me and a group of friends camp in this really remote area in southern Brazil, not far from the border of Argentina. It's by a small pond with only 4 to 5 families, all small vacation houses that are only sporadically occupied. There's literally 0 cell phone service in this entire region. So we spend a day swimming and grilling and whatever, and most are sleeping except me, when I see a flashlight through the trees not too far away, maybe 100 meters at most. I just watch the flashlight, thinking maybe it's someone going to another camp who arrived early. I guessed it was 3 a.m.-ish. Then the person, a woman, started yelling in kind of a panicked tone, in a language I didn't understand. Some people out there do speak German, and it sounded like weird English, so I thought maybe it was German. So I woke up my friend, who speaks some. He yelled out something, and the person replied again, but my friend didn't understand. He said maybe it was Dutch, so I tried shouting in English, but this time the person didn't respond at all. They pointed their flashlight toward our camp, paused for like 10 seconds, then turned it off, and we could hear them running quite fast across the woods. None of us were able to really go back to sleep. It was just plain creepy. The next day, we walked around the pond to each camp and asked if anyone had heard or knew the person that could be, and nobody had a clue. Although, some said they heard the yelling and saw the flashlight and thought it was just us being drunk. This is a really remote area that nobody would ever be there by mistake. To this day, it's probably my biggest what the hell moment. I still worry that it was a lost tourist or something who stayed lost in the Brazilian bush. 20-ish years ago, myself, my fellow Boy Scout troops, saw some strange lights in the sky. We were in Texas, pretty far out in the middle of nowhere, away from any city lights. I don't recall the name of the area. On the night in question, we were sleeping outside in sleeping bags, on cots to be exact, and we arranged our cots out so that we were laying in the same direction, head to toe. I don't recall what actual direction we were facing. We were just lined up the same way. We broke up the sky into sections, top left, top middle, etc., and started watching for satellites. After we'd been watching a while and had seen what we were sure to be at least a couple of different satellites, we saw 3 lights, not much brighter than the satellites we'd recently seen, moving toward one another, none moving in the same direction that the satellites were moving. We were stunned, even more so when they would suddenly stop. They stopped about half of a finger width, holding your finger to the sky, of course, apart from each other. Eventually, they all shot off. each in the direction they came from, but much faster than they were moving the first time. My husband and I were on a hunting trip deep in the northern woods. Dad pulled the 14-foot trailer out to camp and left us there with the intention that we would be up super early and secure sitting spots on public land. The camp was about 10 miles from the nearest person and 35 miles away from real civilization, with street lamps and all other sorts of stuff. Super scenic. It had been snowing, and the pine trees are really tall, and it was quiet outside. We were just laughing and talking when suddenly, something big jumped on the roof. This is northern Michigan in November. There shouldn't be anything big in the woods right now. A bear would be sick or not able to hibernate for some reason and would probably kill you. We stopped mid-sentence and looked up. Right then, it sounded like whatever it was had run along the roof on the trailer and jumped off into the surrounding snow. I needed new pants after that. My husband starts looking for the ammunition for any of the lots of guns we have close by, and both of us are asking each other, what in the actual hell is that? There shouldn't be anything that big in the woods. We didn't hear anything else, and after a moment, we decided that we absolutely had to see what was going on. We heard no footsteps, but also no rustling or anything on a clear night with snow on the ground. You'll hear anything close by that's moving. My husband went first, opening up the door and peering out. No prints in front of the trailer. We slowly walked around the trailer. Being in a small clearing with only a couple of trees, we could see about 25 feet around the trailer. And after looking around and finding nothing, we just went back inside. Logic said that it was either long gone or something else was going on. It took a while to calm down, but eventually, we both fell asleep. Loaded guns on the table a few feet away. The next morning, we got up and went outside to look around again. Still no tracks other than ours and some rabbits. We were outside looking away from the trailer, and we heard the thing running again right across the trailer toward us. We spun around and faced our attacker, and saw some snow falling off the pine tree branches in a line across the aluminum roof. The tree branches don't even start till 40 feet in the air, so of course we couldn't have seen them at night since it was just snow. Nothing looked off when we'd gone to investigate the night before. We genuinely thought that there was a Yeti, Bigfoot, or a severely pissed off nocturnal mutant deer with a taste for blood, and it turned out to be some freaking snow falling out of a tree and hitting the roof. 14 years ago, I went camping with my current wife, who was my then girlfriend, off in the Appalachian Trail in the North Georgia mountains. We camped about 100 yards off of a fire road, which we drove up in my truck. I had firewood in the bed of my truck. I chose not to halt to the campsite. I noticed just before dark, the quantity of firewood seemed lowered than I remembered. I thought nothing of it at the time, as we were a 45-minute drive from anywhere, and was fairly certain there was no other hikers or campers close by. Nearing midnight, I decided to go get a couple more pieces of wood. My wife was not being comfortable being alone in the woods, so she walked to the truck with me. There was no moon that night, so I grabbed my flashlight. I also had my firearm. My wife asked me more than once if a gun was really necessary. When we got to my truck, we heard rustling about 20 feet away in the fire road. I shone my light in that direction, and we see a middle-aged man and two teenage boys. They were filthy, with tattered clothes, certainly no hikers. Think of the movie Deliverance, and the man asked, "Y'all got any sticks?" I replied, "Nope," grabbed the last couple pieces of wood and returned to our campsite. I told my wife within their earshot, that's why I brought a gun. Never saw nor heard them again. While hiking with my dog on a remote trail, I saw a man about 100 feet down the trail behind us taking pictures. At first, I assumed he was taking nature photos or something, but then I noticed out of the corner of my eye that he was pointing his camera right at me. When I looked at him, he quickly turned away. I started walking faster, wanting to get the hell out of there as I was getting really bad vibes. My dog kept looking over her shoulder and growling. I looked back and now the guy was maybe 30 feet away. I started walking again and a couple of minutes later, my dog starts growling. I look back and now this dude is maybe 10 feet away, clicking away with his camera. I was nearing the end of the trail, so I started going faster, jogging at this point. Suddenly, my dog, who is a 100-pound German Shepherd, stops dead in her tracks, turns around and starts barking and baring her teeth, which she never does. I turn around and this guy is maybe 4 feet from us. He had to have been jogging to have kept up. I could see my car then, so I pulled my dog over to a nearby fence and stood with my back to it while motioning for the guy to go ahead of us. He looked nervous and lingered for a minute and then took off. I don't ever go hiking alone anymore without my dog. My cousins and I got a cabin in West Virginia for just a few days. Every night we would hear some farmers' dogs barking at something in the woods nearby, but I just thought it was just coyotes. I've gone hiking in California a lot and know that coyotes don't really bother people in a large group. We went out hiking in the woods by the cabin and we followed a road until it ended for a few miles, and then just kept going until we go to sort of a hill where the trail zigzags down. I said we should just take a shortcut and go straight down, so this is where we kind of split up. Me and my friend Omar went down the hill while one of my cousins stayed at the top of the hill to rest for a minute while my other two cousins took the trail. We got about halfway down the hill when I saw something white in the leaves. I went up to it and it was just a vertebrae and hip bones of a large deer, it seemed. My friend Omar asked me if coyotes had killed it. So I took a closer look and noticed that its neck bones had been broken, so it was a higher likelihood of a mountain lion. Then just a few feet down, we found another spine, and then a kill that was probably a day or two old. It still had skin on it. It started to look real bad. The sun was going down and we were all scattered. We were definitely in its territory. My cousins are then panicking and would try to run, which is a bad idea, so I told them it was probably going to rain and we should leave before the trail got too muddy and too dark. Me and Omar told them about what we found later, and they didn't even leave the cabin for s'mores that night. A year or so back, I did a 3-month-long outdoor expedition in Arizona. We saw plenty of strange things, ranging from the Marfa lights, while on our way by car to our canoeing section, an old Mexican man trying to sell 15 people hatchets for chocolate, or the calls of elk near our camp. But nothing beats this one strange thing only I saw. We were nearing the end of our 3-month expedition, which was probably the last 2 weeks, and we started our ISE, which is Individual Solo Expedition. We started the trip in a mountain range that was close by as a whole group, but split into 4 groups of 4. My group was the most experienced of hikers, so we gave ourselves a 25 to 30 mile loop through 3 days, as the rest did the easier 15-mile sections. The first day was alright, with nothing too challenging. The second day, things got weird for the group. We heard footsteps near us, but no one was around. About 7 miles into the day, and we saw an old abandoned cabin that we used as a marker since it was on our map. We were going to start heading east once we reached it, but we decided to take a break near it. So we placed our bags on the ground and started to talk about a snack. About 10 minutes into the break, I needed to pee, so I wandered away from about 30 feet closer to the cabin and started doing business. I could look inside the cabin while I was standing there, so I did peek inside. I swear to God, I saw a wispy-looking man inside the cabin, standing there looking at me. He was wearing an old, tattered, dirty cotton shirt and brown pants, with a long, white beard. As I saw the man, a chill was sent through my body. I freaked out when I saw him and quickly finished up and rushed to the others and told them what I had seen. Of course, none of them believed me, so they joked a bit, but I was quite distraught by this. I told them either go look for yourself or let's get out, and they realized I wasn't kidding at that point. Mind you, I'm not a huge muscular guy, but to the point in this expedition, we have gotten to know each other quite well, and they knew I wasn't easily freaked out. I was usually the one to grab a snake and get it out of camp, or other crawling creatures. But they saw how freaked out I was, and how I hightailed it the hell out of there. The rest of the day was fine until night came around, and we all heard those footsteps again. So we all became on edge and pulled out our camp knives and kept them close. Eventually, we all fell asleep, and nothing else bothered us the rest of the time, but that freaked me the hell out, and still having nightmares about that man to this day.